today. One of them is a readout of the Future of Food Consumer Survey, which we conducted just a short while ago, and some of you were participants in it. But even if you weren't, Aishwarya, I know you weren't one of them. I think you'll find the results to be quite interesting. And then, sort of related to that, we are going to ask Priya Bala to talk to us about how you can be food wise, really a conscious, thoughtful, responsible diner, particularly when you're eating out or when you're ordering in. So I'll get to it straight away. We're going to spend maybe the first, about 25 minutes going through the survey results. We'll have, some time for questions and discussion after, and then we'll go to the next topic, which Priya will do. So, Srijata, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Now, the reason we did this survey was because the present of food, but most certainly the future of food has a significant implication for the future of the planet, and not just for our own health, but also for the health of the planet. And the survey was designed in a way that would help us understand what consumers in metro cities in urban India think about when we sort of think about the elements that are important to the future of food. And we had a little over 200 people respond to the survey from, as I said, metro cities. And this first page is a little bit about who responded. What is the profile of the consumer in this case? So most of our respondents were between the age of 30 to 50. We had some that were younger, and then we also had some that are older than that. And these are people who are eating out at least once, maybe even two times a week, and have a spending capacity of between 500 rupees to 2000 per person per meal. So if you kind of just, take a moment to reflect on what that is. I mean, people who are in the age of 30 to 50 perhaps are working professionals. So they do have, Srijata, I think we've gone out of slideshow. Yeah, thanks. We're back. They do have some spending capacity, but they're eating out a couple of times a week. And, I'm not sure what you all think of it, but as we were looking at the results of the survey, we kind of thought that, to be able to spend between 500 to 2000 rupees per person per meal is not a small amount of money. Needless to say, we've got a couple of insights as we go through the results on, on whether everyone's spending equally, because you might see some differences in what younger people prefer versus those that are in this age range, and the preference in general is for casual dining, in particular for Indian regional food or food that is specific to an international region. Srijata? So effectively, with 70% of our respondents, needless to say, if this sample were different in some way, then the results could change. But if we kind of think about an urban consumer, frankly, somebody like you and me, and you can think about others in your family or within your community, 70% of our respondents are eating out a couple of times a week, which basically tells us that eating out is no longer restricted to a special occasion. I mean, certainly if I think back at a time when I was much younger, I mean, we grew up in a family of five. So it usually was, three or four, or at the most five times in the year. But that isn't the case anymore. Now, because we are thinking about eating out in this sort of, I'll say, casual, everyday sort of a sense, and I know Priya will talk about this a little bit more in her section, it's no surprise that casual dining is the most preferred option. And this incidentally happens to be true across all age groups within our sort of respondent sample. Having said that, younger people, meaning those that are in the age range of say 18 to 30, so late teens or early 20s or mid 20s, they have indicated that after casual dining, their preference actually is for cafes and also for street food. Perhaps, again, not it wasn't particularly surprising to us considering that street food is also likely to be a little bit less expensive, than going to a sit down place and, even to cafes, which can now be across quite a wide range of how they actually price their dishes. Now, if we sort of build on, what we are learning about how people are eating out and how often they are eating out, even though 70% of the people are eating out a couple of times a week, only 30% people said that they pay attention to nutrition when they're eating out, when they're ordering in. Now, that's quite interesting because if you eat out more than a few times in a week, effectively in some way you're sort of, replacing your everyday, say, home cooked meal with a meal that's from the outside. But we are not necessarily thinking about whether that meal from the outside is equally nourishing. So that's something to think about. Are we actually paying attention to what we need in the form of nutrition and health when we eat out more frequently? Next slide, Sriyata, please. Thanks. The next thing then is in terms of preference. So even though casual dining is the preference, in terms of literally what people are, preferring to eat when they eat out, most people said that they really prefer Indian food. And I remember when we were sort of looking at these results together, this insight was a little bit surprising to Priya, because sometimes when we think about what eating out looks like or feels like from a distance, it feels like a lot of people are choosing fast food, like burgers or sandwiches or wraps or, tortillas or burritos or whatever have you. But most people who responded said that, even young people said that their preference is for Indian food. Having said that, again, younger people said they are sometimes looking for less expensive options, understandably, because, they probably have just lower spending capacity in comparison to somebody who's older. Now, this is a really interesting insight, especially when we think about its implications. So, an overwhelming number of respondents said that above all, what they look for when they eat out and when they, particularly, I guess, when they order in, is convenience. It trumps everything else. So, convenience is more important than price. Convenience is more important than brand as well. And I think when we think about what convenience means, just in a very sort of commonplace understanding at this point of time, it really means being able to get something to the doorstep. And this is an important insight to pause on because, um, as I suppose, as the traffic and the pollution in our cities increases, and most of us, I think, here live in Bangalore, but in any other metro city in India, it's really quite attractive, to have something come to the doorstep, whether it, be your vegetables or a meal, or for that matter, a cup of tea, which also can, will come from a couple of kilometers from your home. But when we sort of choose to prioritize our convenience above everything else, there are some implications that have an implication on, on other people, as well as, as well as the natural environment. One of them is that you might not be on the road going to get a meal, but somebody else is on the road, bringing a meal to you, or bringing a cup of tea to you, or whatever it is that, that you're seeking. The second thing, particularly when it comes to food, is food that's ordered in comes from, as you all probably know, comes from places called cloud kitchens. It could also come from the restaurant of a kitchen, but a lot of it is really coming from cloud kitchens, which are sort of coming closer and closer to our neighborhoods, so that the time between when you want your food and how long it takes for it to get to you reduces. It's very difficult then as a consumer to know what the quality of that food is, what the quality of the kitchen is where your food came from. And and the third thing, quite um, simply, is is about what that does, I think, when you think about pollution, I mean, you only really just have to be at, at a signal outside your house to see how many two-wheelers are, are carrying food to someone all the time. So this is a really important point to reflect on, which is, the implication of putting our convenience ahead of everything else, and what that truly means to quality of food, as well as what it means to sustainability overall. Then the next thing was, we had asked our respondents, do you look for seasonal vegetables and fruit in a menu when you're eating out and when you're ordering in? And again, interestingly, only a quarter of our respondents said that they look for vegetables and fruit. And just, for a moment, think about a restaurant menu. And, when we say restaurant menu, whether it's an online menu or whether it's actually something you're reading when you go to eat out, it's kind of the same, as we know. For one, you will find that most menus don't have any vegetables at all. Paneer does not qualify as, as vegetable, even though it's an important element of our food culture in some parts of the country. And usually when you ask for vegetables, my experience has sort of been that you'll get offered, after paneer, you usually get offered mushroom. And then these days you might get offered broccoli. But it's important to, again, think about how we treat, especially if you're eating out more and more often, how we are sort of thinking about eating out in a different way than we do when we think about what a good balanced meal at home is, which is, at least in an Indian household, even today, will comprise of vegetables, will comprise of lentils, will comprise of fruit at some point of time in the day. And the reason why seasonality is important is because it is through the seasons that we experience nature. So, when we eat out more often from places or at places that actually aren't serving seasonal vegetables or fruit, or when you're not asking for them, it effectively means that we are consuming in ways that are out of sync with, with what sort of nature tells us to do. Next. We're going to go through this quickly so that, you have a good feeling for the results, and then we'll pause. Only 7% of our respondents said that they pay attention to the source of ingredients in their meals. And, when we talk about source, we mean, what we ask people is, are you paying attention to where the food came from and how it was grown? Is it chemical free? Was it grown, for example, using, and you'll see this on labels, free range, sustainably produced, chemical free, different things, at least those producers or growers that are using methods which are chemical free will tend to use language like that. But when we eat out, we are not asking these questions. And then, of course, if you're ordering in, unless someone actually specifies where their ingredients come from, we are, we are not going to know. Quite simply said, there is now, an increasing number of, I'll say, eating establishments that are either providing that information, because they believe it's important. They also believe it's a differentiator for them. I mean, recently we ate at a very nice restaurant here in Bangalore in Indiranagar, which is actually serving Madurai cuisine. And on the very back of the menu, much to our surprise, literally on the very last page, where you might not even go, they had actually written like a whole paragraph on how they are not, how their food comes from growers who don't use chemicals, and a number of other things. But the point is, as consumers, very, very few of us are proactively seeking to understand where food is coming from. We ask a preference as a consumer over local ingredients, for local ingredients or for imported ingredients. If you think about this at all, now, on the one hand, 50% of our respondents said that they prefer local ingredients in their food, which is a great thing, because it very simply means that if it is local, it has traveled a shorter distance it is likely to be just more fresh. And, and ultimately it means that the purchase of that local ingredient has supported the livelihood of somebody who is producing it or growing it in, in close distance to where it's being consumed. That said, when you sort of think about the other side of this response, which is 50% of the people, there were very few people who said, I have a preference for imported ingredients over local ingredients. There were some, by the way. I think it sort of comes from eating out as an experience. And, when I'm eating out, I want it to be different from a home meal. So I like it if my ingredients are imported and they've come from elsewhere. But the remaining 50% is mostly comprised of people who said that they don't think about this at all, about whether the ingredients are local or whether they are from somewhere else. So again, something to think about, particularly when one is eating, say, something like fish for that matter, which is where the fish came from. I mean, there are ways even to eat sushi, and good sushi in a way that the fish doesn't actually always have to come all the way from Japan or Thailand, which is where it typically comes from. But similarly, for vegetables and fruit, I mean, there's quite a avocado craze at the moment, isn't it? I mean, it has been around for a few years and it's very popular. I mean, there are young people in my family who, really like avocado. It's a good question to ask where the avocado came from, because a lot of it comes all the way from Mexico, but our country produces a lot of really good avocado. So there is a way to eat, you know, without that food having come a really long way away, when you don't really know what it contains, what the carbon footprint of that food is, and then, ultimately whose livelihood it has actually supported. Next. 84% of our respondents said, so a very large number, as you can see, said that they do not want additives, substitutes, or processed ingredients in their meals. And I'll kind of go through that, just a little bit to make sure everybody here understands what those things actually mean. And Priya, again, will be able to talk about this at greater length in her section a little bit later. Additives are basically, things that are added to a meal to enhance the food. So these could be things like coloring agents, they could be flavoring agents, they could be things like taste makers. Substitutes are effectively substitutes of natural ingredients. So, something that is cheese-like, but not really cheese made out of milk, or cream, which is, again, not cream from milk as we understand it. So effectively, anything that is a substitute or an additive, and most certainly anything that is processed, is a chemical ingredient and is an additive in the food. Now, as a consumer, unless, we actually ask, it is impossible to actually know, what your meal contains. So it's really a two-way. There might be some establishments that will tell, and will tell transparently and accurately what their food contains. But in some cases, or in frankly in most cases at this point, at least in our cities and in our country, there isn't necessarily a requirement to declare anything, especially when you're cooking a meal. So it's no surprise that as consumers, we don't want these things. But the question really is, are we actually asking? How do we know whether the food contains these things or not? And then how will I kind of also make a difference between, you can ask that question to someone if you go to a restaurant and you eat out, because, you might interact with the server or someone who is engaging you. But especially when you order in, there's really no way to know. Next. 80% of our participants said that they care about reducing food waste, and 90%, said they want to know about actions that are being taken in eating establishments to reduce waste. There was also a lot of, there was also sort of just a lot of, commentary, particularly about waste and so on. We'll talk about some of it later. This too is, it's a little bit like that previous insight on we don't want food to be wasted, much in the same way that we don't want to have additives in in our food or substitutes in our food. But it sort of brings us back to that question, which is, as consumers, do we actually ask an eating establishment what they do with their food waste? And then before we actually put that question to an eating establishment, are we mindful of of food waste, which can occur in many different ways, right? From when you actually place an order for your food, whatever it may be, whether it's raw food or cooked food, and and how much and how you consume. um, the next thing was about packaging. Whether when you bring food in or when you eat out, are you paying attention to packaging? 66% of our respondents said that they don't really prioritize sustainable packaging. And we'll sort of take this one step ahead and say that what's really important, particularly with, I'll say, food that is flying from here to there, if you know what I mean. I mean, food that's traveling a distance to come to a consumer, is to minimize packaging in the first place. I mean, to reduce packaging is a sort of, action item one, before we then go to, well, if there must be packaging, then it must be reusable, it must be compostable, it must be plastic free. And these, all of these things mean different things. And just as I'll say, as consumers who have the spending capacity to consume in this way, and just I'd sort of say, as conscientious consumers, these are things we must really start to inform ourselves about, if we are not already informed about them. There are many ways in which packaging can either be completely eliminated, or or can be, I'll sort of say, reimagined. I mean, if you can't use your own containers, then if plastic comes into your home, often it'll come in the form of little sort of bags and boxes that will carry chutneys and two pieces of mango pickle, or will carry three small pieces of papad, whether you're washing them so you can reuse them. Also, anything that is sold as compostable, for instance, compostable lids on tea and coffee cups, when you actually take it away, nothing just composts on its own. Everything takes time. And most things that are made out of anything that that contains something that is not natural takes many months for for it to actually decompose into natural matter, and some of it will never ever decompose. So this is a really big point, especially since this form of consumption has sort of become just a way of life, I suppose, just in modern society. We had asked, just sort of in free form, we had asked our respondents to say what they would like to see change in their favorite restaurants, like places they often eat from. And here's what they said. Um, we thought you would find this interesting. Um, they said three main things. One, they said they would like more fresh and more local ingredients. They'd like to see their favorite restaurants directly support local organic farmers and producers. Um, I don't know if you can read it all, so I'll read a couple of things to you. Somebody said in that same section, please stop using MSG. Um, I can feel it is there in the food, but they keep denying it. This is, and MSG is very much an additive. And this is the point about, you don't want it, but it might be there in your food, and you won't actually know. In this case, of course, it looks like somebody has asked, but they've been told repeatedly that it's not there in the food. The second is that consumers would like for restaurants and eating establishments to also think about nutrition. This is a really important point also, because there are probably sections of our urban society, for instance, young people who are living in the cities, away from what might be their home cities or hometowns. They might be living in paying guest accommodations or otherwise, where They may not, for instance, have a kitchen facility that enables them to cook their own meals every day. And when they do rely actually on eating out as sort of their constant source of nourishment, then it's important that, eating establishments also start to sort of have a sense of responsibility towards prioritizing nutrition equally, as they, equally as taste or diversity of menu or ingredients and so on. And the third big point that consumers raised as, what they'd like to see change is less waste and better packaging. And this, as we just discussed a few minutes ago, is really really a two-way street, because one way to stop is to be much more mindful about how much we consume as consumers externally, and how much packaging we force an industry to generate, because we want to consume in a certain way. And then of course equally, for better technologies to be used, or better practices for that matter. I mean, there are eating establishments, for instance, that will not give you a takeaway unless you bring your own steel or plastic dabba, for instance, and so on. So that was sort of, what came out of the survey.